Across continents, nations are facing the same fundamental question. Who should control what is considered public? And what happens when the ownership of shared assets, whether they are airports, housing, or even political institutions, begins to shift? Today we look at two stories taking place thousands of miles apart, yet connected by the same struggle over power and belonging. In Canada, the federal government is revisiting the possibility of privatizing major airports. Supporters see this as a strategy to unlock billions of dollars in investment, modernize infrastructure, and bring global expertise into international development. Critics warn that moving these strategic assets into the hands of private investors risks higher fees, reduces public oversight, and a weakening of the idea that essential gateways to the country should serve the public first. Meanwhile, in New York City, a historic election has reshaped the meaning of political representation. The victory of Zohran Mamdani, the city's first Muslim mayor, is not just symbolic, it reflects a demographic and cultural reality long present but rarely empowered, and it challenges old assumptions about who gets to lead a city as diverse, complicated, and economically strained as New York. Tonight's discussions are about ownership, representation, identity, and national direction. Public assets and public power both ask the same question: who decides the future? I'm Rana Al-Khassas, and this is In Focus. Canada's new budget has reopened the debate on airport privatization, an idea first examined in 2016 but shelved due to public concern. Now, under Prime Minister Mark Carney's government, the proposal is back, framed as part of a broader strategy to mobilize private capital for large-scale national infrastructure projects. The approach would not immediately sell airports outright. Instead, it would adjust the governance model, extending leases with airport authorities, enabling commercial development on airport lands, and reviewing rent formulas. Canadian pension funds, which already own significant stakes in airports in Europe, the United Kingdom, and Australia, are seen as prime investors. Supporters argue this would release public capital for new priority projects. Critiques, on the other hand, warn it risks shifting control of strategic gateways toward profit-driven pricing. And from Paris, we are joined by Maher Nicolas Frzili, Director General of the World Pensions Council. A very warm welcome, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with me today in today's very contentious issue, which is a new subject in which we will be very happy that you will be with us with your informative knowledge to tell us more about. Canada is framing airport privatization as a tool to unlock capital rather than a fiscal necessity. Do you see this initiative as a proactive investment strategy or a response to deeper structural weakness in Canada's economic model?
Delighted to join you today, Rana. It's a great question and it's a great moment in our economic history, and almost everything these days is linked either to President Trump's economic and financial policies, which are impacting all countries all over the world, including America's close neighbors and former allies, Mexico and Canada, and that meta topic, which is the gigantic, huge economic, industrial, and military rivalry, pitting the Chinese dragon against the American eagle, right? And the Canadians are kind of in the crossfire of that. And the Canadians had it easy, quote unquote, because NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement with the US and with Mexico, was an amazing deal for the Canadians. So for 20, 25 years, the Canadians, just like the Mexicans, they profited greatly from that free trade agreement with the US, and it unraveled very brutally, very abruptly 7 months ago when President Trump decided to pursue an America First economic policy. So to make a long story short, the Canadians have had a lot of soul searching in the past 7, 8 months. And ironically, before Trump entered the White House, the Canadian right, the very conservative Canadian right was ahead in the polls. Justin Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party, was collapsing. And in part because of a few communication issues when Trump, started putting pressure on the Canadians, it helped his enemies. So it helped the party of Mark Carney, and the Conservatives, who were perceived as pro-Trump, they completely collapsed. And it was a miracle that Carney was able to win the elections and become the new Prime Minister of Canada. Another miracle, Mark Carney is the only man who was the governor of two big central banks. He was the governor of the Central Bank of Canada and also the governor of the Bank of England in London. So he knows a lot about finance, and he is, you could say, a center-right. He's a center-right Prime Minister. And it's ironic because in the media in America, Europe, and the Middle East, he's described very much as a center-left liberal because they compare him to Trump, and they naively believe that Mark Carney is a center-left liberal. It's not true. In reality, he's very center-right, and the new budget being discussed now in Ottawa is a center-right budget with two big words: privatization of key national assets. As you said, the
Sir,
airport.
sorry to interrupt you here. Canada does not need this funds and this privatization. And why are you relating it to Trump? Are we copying the policies of Donald Trump?
You're absolutely right. And that's why I said Mark Carney is center-right. He's a neoliberal, and he's doing it in part for ideological reasons. Not only because Mark Carney believes in that. So the pressure from Trump is accelerating a process which, in my opinion, would have happened anyway. Why? Because Canada is a pension superpower. What do I mean by that? There are only 4 or 5 countries in the world who are pensions superpowers. It means that their retirement schemes, the pension funds of Canada, are gigantic. They have a lot of money. They own a lot of assets compared to the GDP of the country. And so there are only 4 or 5 countries like that. One of them is Canada. The other is Australia. There's also Holland. These are pension superpower. And you are right. The big Canadian pension funds already own some of the biggest airports in Europe, England, the Middle East, and Asia. So ironically, they already deploy their long-term capital abroad, but they don't own a lot of infrastructure assets domestically. So they don't.
Perfect, sir. This brings us to another question. Canadian pension funds already control strategic infrastructure globally, yet historically have limited influence at home. What political or institutional barriers have prevented domestic investment, and why might those barriers be weakening now, sir?
Well, the main reason is privatization. So, the other big elephant in the room is the Australians. So these are 2 gigantic pension superpowers. Australian pension funds, they also have a lot of money. And in Australia, 20, 30 years ago, they privatized massively ports, airports, highways, rails, energy. The Canadians, ironically, they went to London and Paris and New York and California to buy other people's airports and other people's ports and other people's pipelines and highways, but their own highways and their own airports domestically in Quebec, Ontario, have not been privatized for many reasons. One of the reasons is provincial governments have a lot of power in Canada, and there was never at the same time a strong will from the provincial government in Ontario, Quebec, and the federal government in Ottawa, a strong will to privatize. Public opinion was not ready for it, but now things are changing. Once again, one of the reasons why things are changing is pressure from America and the belief that the economy is slowing, and the only way to jumpstart the growth engine of the economy is to direct more money domestically at home.
Privatization advocates, sir, describe this as recycling public capital, turning mature state assets into engines for new development. In practice, does this model genuinely generate national value, or can it simply shift ownership without producing new growth?
It's a great question, and I'm going to try to reply to your question honestly. I am neutral, so I'm slightly favorable to the concept of privatizing public asset.
Why, sir?
If it's done properly, and it's a big if, and we saw recently, for example, in the UK, right? In the UK, the water utilities, one of the biggest water utilities in England and Britain was privatized, and it was a big failure, a massive failure. So what I'm coming at, I'm trying to be here neutral and objective. It can work very well if it's executed properly. So if the government controls the privatization process smartly, and usually it's a PPP, so it's a public-private partnership. So the government gives a concession, not for eternity, so it's not privatization forever, unlike what people think. Usually it's a 30, 40, 50 years time frame, and for 50 years or 40 years...
It's like a lease, sir.
Exactly, but it's delicate. Personally, I think it can work well if implemented smartly. But regardless,
And, sir, at the end of the day, the government is going to assign this job to one of the companies in the country, which will add investment to the companies in Canada.
Yes. And back to your first question. The Canadians, unlike, let's say, the Brazilians or the Kuwaitis, whatever, the Canadians don't really need that. They're doing it today by choice because they think it will make them more competitive, and they think it will bring back money from these gigantic pension funds. Some of it will go domestically, will be invested more in Toronto and Montreal as opposed to going abroad. So I think it's part of that new model. You can call it Canadian economic nationalism, different from Trump, because the Canadian Mark Carney brand of economic nationalism will probably be more, quote unquote, liberal and free trade oriented than Trump. But it's a sign of the rise of economic nationalism, different models, Chinese, American, Canadian. So really, it's a sign of the times.
Sir, we've seen it, and you mentioned the United Kingdom, but we've seen international cases such as Sydney, Heathrow, of course, you mentioned the United Kingdom, and Athens, where privatization delivered efficiency gains, but also brought higher fees and reduced public oversight. What lessons must Canada internalize, sir, to avoid repeating those pitfalls?
So, Greece, as you said, Britain are good examples where the privatization of airports was quite successful. So it was a win-win on average, right? A win-win on average for both the public, the government, and the private sector investors. But you're right, it's never easy. It's infrastructure investment in itself is very complicated. If you add to that infrastructure investment within a privatization of public asset framework, it's even more complicated. So you're absolutely right. The government needs to be very careful. And here the key word is financial experts and lawyers. So when they negotiate with the private sector, including pension fund investors, including their own Canadian pension fund investors, they have to lawyer up. So the government must be really on an equal playing field. And when they negotiate for weeks, for months, for years, to find the perfect equilibrium between the public interest and the private interest, they must have on their side, on the government side, some top-notch financial experts and legal experts, because it's risky.
Got your
and
point,
complicated.
Mr. Frizzley. Mr. Frizzley, in short, finally, beyond economics, do you believe this debate reflects a changing philosophy about the role of the state in the 21st century and whether public goods should remain public at all?
Yes, but it goes beyond that. So, because the traditional, public good, private money, it's an old debate, very old debate. Now it goes beyond that. Why am I saying that? Because the new era is defined by increased economic competition and economic and financial nationalism. And within the framework of the age of geoeconomics, the intensifying Chinese-American technological, financial rivalry, the whole world is waking up and is saying, oh my God, the world out there is becoming more difficult, more brutal. We have to make our own country more competitive or we will be completely left behind. So I think it's the logic of an intensifying international rivalry between all countries and the rise of economic nationalism.
Mr. Frizzley, with your big if that you left us, of course, with an answer that, with a question that does not have an answer, yes, until this happens and we are going to be with you again and we discuss it again and see the future of infrastructure is not only a financial conversation, it is a conversation about national identity, accessibility and public benefits. And just as nations debate who controls public assets, cities are also debating who controls public leadership. The election of Zohran Mamdani as New York's first Muslim mayor marks a significant shift in the city's political identity. The celebration in neighborhoods across Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx reflected more than shared heritage. It reflected a sense of long-awaited visibility. Mamdi's campaign was driven by affordability, renters, pressures, and socioeconomic inequality. But equally central was the idea of belonging, the right of working class, immigrant and Muslim communities to see themselves represented not only in population statistics but in position of power. This victory challenges assumptions about who is allowed to lead and whose story shapes the city's political narrative. Joining us from New York is David K. Johnston, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and professor of Rochester Institute of Technology. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you very much for your time. And I think in a victorious day like today, we have a very important topic to discuss. Zohran Mamdani's victory did not emerge spontaneously. It reflects long-term demographic presence without proportional political power. What structural or historical forces finally converge to break that imbalance now, specifically, sir?
Well, Mamdani ran an incredibly smart campaign focused on the cost of living in New York City, which has gone up dramatically in recent years. He was able to appeal to a younger audience of voters between 18 and 25 years old, overwhelmingly voted for him, as well as other demographic groups. But I think the key issue here is that he said, look, we can provide buses for free. To ride a New York City bus now costs $3. He proposed that the city would subsidize or operate grocery stores in neighborhoods that don't have grocery stores. And when you don't have grocery stores, people eat fast food that is not good for their health. And other things that as mayor, he actually can do if he can get the funding and get the city council to come along. And he had the good fortune to be running against Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced former
Yes, sir,
governor.
can I please ask you a question
Sure.
here? How could he lead and be the mayor of New York over Como?
Well, Andrew Cuomo is a very effective government leader, but he was disgraced by his conduct. He was found to be harassing women, and he has lots of enemies because he runs roughshod over people instead of trying to work and cooperate with them. And he aligned himself at the end with Donald Trump. And in New York City, that's about the worst possible thing a politician can do. Trump came from New York City, but he lost not only the city, but his own voting precinct when he was a New York resident.
His campaign reaffirmed affordability from an economic issue to a political identity issue, linking rent, wages, and belonging. How did this create a new emotional and material narrative for working class voters across backgrounds, sir?
Well, that's part of the genius of this young man who is currently a state legislator. He understood that people in New York are feeling squeezed by rising rents, high costs of transportation, even if they use public transportation, and wages that for most people are not rising. And he went out to meet with ordinary people constantly. He stayed on message. He's the beneficiary of some changing demographics. So the number of Jewish voters in New York has gone down significantly. The number of Muslim voters, while still relatively small, has been rising. But his appeal to young people about their economics going forward was absolutely central to his success. And 10 days ago, Cuomo held a rally that drew 300 people. Mamdani held a rally that drew 13,000 people.
Oh my God.
Making it clear. And so New York City is not a place full of bigots. This is not southern states in the United States. This is the center of the liberal establishment in America and the financial establishment in America. And Mamdani threaded the needle to get to the mayor's office very smartly, and especially by staying on message. Elect me, I will use the powers of the mayor as best I can to improve your finances.
Sir, I wanted to ask you a question and I wanted you to comment. Did you listen to his speech when he won?
Some of it.
Did you read or what's your narrative about his speech, and did you see that it was very different than any speech that we have ever witnessed?
It's quite different. And Mamdani is self-assured and confident, which, well, all politicians have big egos, including him. Many of them are sort of plagued by their own insecurities. He made it clear that he wants to be magnanimous, and he's the mayor of everybody in New York, whether you voted for him or not. He didn't use this as a chance to get digs at people. Now, he's going to face a very tough road because Donald Trump has made it clear he'll do everything he can with the federal government to punish the city of New York for electing Mamdani. Trump calls him a lunatic and a communist, which are both nonsense. But that's the kind of rhetoric that works for Trump, but not in New York City.
The campaign, sir, invested heavily in multilingual, relational organizing, not just messaging. Does this suggest that the future of urban policies or politics will depend less on media and more on rebuilding social infrastructure between communities, which we really need at this point, or the entire world needs at this point?
Yeah, for years I have argued that you shouldn't waste money on TV ads off which the consultants get to keep 13% or so as fees. That's why the campaign consultants for both Republicans and Democrats are really rich people. You should put it into a ground game, organize people, get them registered to vote, then get them to the polls. And Mamdani has made it clear that the organizing done by his supporters, many of them young people in their 20s, is going to continue, that it isn't, oh, I got elected, now we can disband this. He intends to make this permanent. If the Democrats want to win back control in other jurisdictions, and they did extraordinarily well last night across the United States in off-year elections, governors, state legislators, even judges, they need to develop what we call a ground game. Talk to people, get people to knock on doors. That's how you build a political movement. So hopefully we will see less of this emphasis on television ads, which research shows move 1/3 of voters, get them to change their position. 1/3. They're ineffective, but expensive.
Mamdani, sir, did not hide his Muslim identity, and he foregrounded it, and he emphasized on it. In your view, does this mark a transition from defense visibility to assertive political presence for Muslim and immigrant communities in America?
We've seen not just Mamdani, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, a historically red state, large parts of it are red, but now the urban centers in that state are blue, that is Democrat, is a Muslim. And the anti-Muslim efforts of the Trump administration don't appeal to many people. And Mamdani, by being right up front about it, hi, I'm a Muslim, I was born in Kenya, I'm now a US citizen, by not apologizing for it or shirking away from it, but being candid and right up front about it, that comforted a lot of people. Now, there are people upset about some of his positions relative to Israel, but he managed those fairly well in trying to minimize vigorous opposition. But overall in America, I think you're beginning to see a reduction in the kind of bigotry we had starting with 9/11.
Sir, some argue that representation becomes symbolic unless it results in institutional change. What early indicators should we watch to determine whether Mamdani's administration will shift power, not just reflect it?
Well, getting free buses, which some cities in America already have, will be something the mayor can do. He has the power to do it, but he has to find the money to do it. Opening up.
Do you think they're going to give him money, or they're not going to be helping?
I think that's the fight we're going to see. Is he able to get the city council?
So there's a fight we're going to be seeing.
I'm sorry?
So there is a fight we're going to be witnessing.
I would expect there will be some opposition to free buses from members of the city council. There certainly will be from the state of New York, which helps fund the city, and from the federal government, absolutely. But Mamdani can begin to move in that direction. He can do it in a limited way. And then the grocery store issue is another one that, does he start finding places and either subsidizing or opening city-run grocery stores? And he also has the power to freeze rents. Now, if you do that for the long term, buildings fall apart because landlords can't take care of them. But in the short run, a rent freeze would be a signal that he's serious about what he's doing. And I expect that'll be one of the first things he moves to do once he's sworn in as mayor.
Sir, New York has always been a political bellwether. Do you believe this victory signals the emergence of a new governing coalition nationally, one where immigrant and working class communities define major city politics?
Well, if you look at the results beyond New York City, in New Jersey, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania on the courts, in California on redistricting, I think it's quite clear that there's a big shift taking place in America. I think that shift is away from Donald Trump's politics of anger and denunciation and heavy-handed use of law enforcement, putting toddlers in diapers in handcuffs, as we've seen repeatedly. I think that's revulsed a lot of people. What we don't know yet is, can the Democrats as a party overall work together to create a new coalition focused on what voters want, which is, if I elect you, what are you going to do for me? Don't talk about, your highfalutin ideas of an ideal world. What are you going to do for me? And if the Democrats can come up with a plan for that, they should do very well in the rest of the country next year.
Mr. David, finally and shortly before we leave, and I have to thank you because they're going to kill me here. Sir, do you see that what's happening and shifting in the political aspects in the United States, especially in New York, which is one of course, the biggest and one of the most important cities in the United States of America? Do you see that this is starting to make the Democrats stronger in a way than the Republicans, and on the ground, Donald Trump is losing ground?
Well, Donald Trump is losing ground, and the Republicans who stick with him are in trouble. Now, whether the Democrats are able to turn this into more for them, or as they often do, snatch victory out of the jaws of success, and mess it up, that we haven't seen yet. But it's certainly a hopeful sign that we will have less politics based on bigotry and hatred in America. And Mamdani will be central to that shift if it is in fact taking place and this isn't a one-off.
Are you happy, sir?
Oh, I think it's a good thing that we have changed majorities in the legislature in Virginia, elected governors who are not foaming at the mouth racists. I mean, some of the people who were run, who Trump supports, are people who not only propose bad ideas, but they're just bad people by their conduct. The Democrats have been picking better quality candidates. That's been important, and younger candidates. The Democratic Party is run by people my age and older, and you need to have young people.
Thank you very, very much, Professor David K. Johnston, for your insights and analysis, and for your time and informative, valuable knowledge from New York. Public assets, public voice, public future, whether in infrastructure or in leadership. Tonight's stories remind us that the question of who decides remains central to every society. Thank you very much for watching In Focus. Thank you very much for the In Focus team for working very hard on this program, and for the editor-in-chief, of course. I'm Rana Al-Khassas. Good night, and thank you very much for watching. Good night from me, myself.